Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a preeminent Sufi teacher, master, and exemplifies the new emerging integrative holistic consciousness. He's worked widely to bridge the gap between the experience of contemplatives and the findings of modern physicists, biologists and psychologists. I'm delighted to welcome Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan.
Thank you, Rajiv.
What is and who is a Sufi?
Yes, it's the most undefinable of all the isms in the world. It is an esoteric tradition that probably originated in the Mazdian days, but developed enormously under the aegis of Islam and has carried some of the fundamental tenets of Islam. But it's very interesting because while in the traditional religion, the Orthodox approach, God is always considered as other. And in Sufism, of course, from the moment that you're talking about personal experience instead of belief, then of course one tries to find some kind of relationship with whatever one means by God. And what my father said once was, for me, very important when you said, when you say God, we don't always realize that what we're talking about is what we think God is or hope God is, and have no idea about what we really mean. And therefore, in the modern context, I like to think of the word, or at least use the word the universe rather than God. Substitute, let's say, the word universe. But the trouble is that the word universe is very impersonal. And of course, for the mystic or the one who is really experiencing a deep relationship with reality, then of course that sense of the universe is too abstract, it's too remote.
In terms of its sort of its deriving from traditions of Islam, is sort of traditional Islam accepting of Sufism, or is it uncomfortable with it?
No, not really. No, there was a time when, of course, in certain countries Sufism is really banned, like, for example, Saudi Arabia. In Iran, of course, it's so much part of the whole belief system of the people. So somehow Al-Ghazali was able to find, build a bridge between the Orthodox Islam and then the sayings of the Sufis, which shocked many of the more orthodox ulema, as they call them, because of the, well, it went as far as when Al-Halaj said An-Haq, which is I am God. And of course, it's a typical Hindu thing, but of course for the Sufis, of course it is, for the Muslims, of course, it is condemned. But of course, Ghazali was able to show that in fact when Al-Halaj was saying that, he was not in his personal consciousness, and that makes all the difference.
Does Sufism derive from a teacher, from a master, or was it just a coming together of...
It's a transmission. It is true that it is based upon, let's say, the masters, the teachers are themselves, they belong to what they call a silsila, which is a chain, so that each Pir or Murshid nominates his successor. And so my father nominated me as his successor. But it doesn't always have to be the son, but somehow or other, maybe there's something about heritage in the family. In this particular case, I like to believe that his choice was right.
What are the qualities that make a worthy successor?
Well, for one thing, one has to have undergone very intense, austere training, and somebody who's really knowledgeable, that is a peer of another order maybe, or whoever, but it must be so. I did my training under the guidance of the Pir Murshid of my father in Secunderabad. I had to make a retreat for 40 days fasting, repeating the zikr, la ilaha, 22,000 times a day, so you know, it shatters your ego. Totally, one comes out of that totally transformed. But really the background of the teaching that I've given is, I must say, of course, there's a deep knowledge of the masters of the past, the Sufis of the past, Bastami, Farid ibn Attar, Ibn Arabi, of course, and Al-Tridi, and so on. But I must say that my father has presented Sufism in a way that is particularly meaningful to the West. And I think the reason for that is because in the West one is very conscious of the need to be aware in life, whereas in the tradition that we've inherited in India, one seeks samadhi, that is to awaken beyond life. They're both complementary, and in my opinion, one needs to awaken beyond life before one is able to awaken in life. But that's my opinion.
So what does it mean to sort of awaken beyond
well,
life?
That's very interesting. Very good question. Actually, it is downplaying a perspective and highlighting another one. And highlighting a more cosmic one and a more transcendent one. More cosmic one, for example, seeing yourself as though you would look from the point of view of the cosmos, instead of seeing the cosmos from your point of view. It's the opposite. It's a word of Saint Francis of Assisi. He said, I thought I was looking at the world, but the world is looking at me. So that would be give some sense of what I mean by the cosmic dimension, so that because one is so inveigled in one's own personal problems, or one's personal assessment of one's problems, that one doesn't really understand what all the issues are, the context instead of the content. And so it's very important to be able to see things, see one's problems as part of the problems of humanity, for example. So that's cosmic. The transcendental dimension is trying to grasp a sense of meaningfulness, and I would say intention behind one's problems, for example, and the unfurling of one's personality. And so that, of course, we're looking at things from a personal vantage point, so being able to see things with a kind of, let's say, overview, as though one was flying in a helicopter, so overseeing things instead of being right down there in the nitty-gritty.
What kind of moral framework or ethical moral structure does the Sufism require?
Well, you see, we really believe in freedom. And we don't like to tell people what to do. In fact, we have in our order, the Sufi Order, in International Sufi Order in the West, we leaders, we call them ambassadors or representatives, are not allowed to tell people what to do, because of course I know that a lot of people don't like to take responsibility and like to go to a guru and the guru tells them what to do. No, we're not allowed to do that, because you're taking away the freedom of people and their sense of responsibility. So let's say that's our moral code. Now I do have one rule, and I know that a lot of people object to it. I'm sorry, but it is really, for me, it is very important, and that is no drugs. Otherwise, we don't feel up to. We can orient people by giving them practices so that they concentrate on a particular quality, and that quality may then have an effect upon the way that they handle their problems. If, for example, if it's obvious that the whole difficulty in that the reason for the person problems is that they're not truthful, then if we give them the quality al-haq, which means truth, then it makes, it has an effect, it sometimes has an effect upon them and will alter their behavior.
You have looked at and sought to build bridges with the work of modern psychologists and biologists and,
and physicists.
And physicists. And the current sort of work and thinking on the biochemistry of the brain is that sort of perception and emotion and feelings, sort of the range of experiences are merely biochemical. How have you sort of reconciled that?
Yes, well, I was very, had a close friendship with Dr. David Bohm. He said, he was a physicist who worked with Einstein. So and, he said, if you look deeply into matter, you find something that is of the nature of the mind. That would mean that cells, electrons, and so on, are gifted with some kind of consciousness or ability to make a choice and so on. So all of those faculties that we ascribe to the mind. And then furthermore, he said, do not be surprised if a change in your understanding or your sense of meaningfulness is going to alter circuits in the brain. And that's very important. That's a relationship between mind and body, which one used to think are two different things, and that are two poles of the same thing. These are new perspectives in science. But of course, it's true that I've been accused of being too sectarian in my adopting the views of Dr. David Bohm, because they have immediate relevance in our meditations. But it's true that they are not, they're not dynamic. That is, they do not account for the evolution, the process of evolution. And that you find in Prigogine, of course. Those are the new perspectives in science.
So if you don't have a notion of morality and ethics, is there a determinant of appropriate behavior? I get the notion of responsibility.
Yes.
But responsibility to what? To whom?
Well, you see, I believe in the value of prayer because one is projecting upon what one imagines to be God qualities, and one is somehow prostrating, at least in Islam, one is prostrating so that in a certain way one is downplaying one's personal idiosyncrasies, and in order to be able to project these qualities upon what one imagines God to be, one develops one arouses these qualities, awakens these qualities in oneself. And so instead of saying, I've got to do this, and I'm not allowed to do this, and so on and so forth, one begins to discover one's highest ideals, and then one lives up to one's own ideals instead of being told what to do or not to do.
So what is the Sufi sort of, the image, the notion of God that you pray to?
See, as my father says, of course, all of this to be found in my father's teaching is our concept of God is a stepping stone. But if we stay by the stepping stone, then we don't reach beyond, of course. But so it would be simplistic to say it is the action of the totality of the cosmos upon each fragment of the cosmos. That would be the holistic way of looking at things. One could say it is the impact of, let's say, I'm using the word the divine intention upon our understanding, so that one is beginning to have a sense of supreme meaningfulness beyond one's understanding. And that has an immediate consequence. That is, let's say, you're talking about the God that one is worshipping. Yes, it's true. I'm using very abstract words. But the consequence is that sense of God becomes very personal. Let's say, when I think of my father, for example, he was always God conscious, always like conscious. He said, where are you to find God if it's not in man? So the sense of let's say, in us. And in fact, there are some statements by my father and by Ibn Arabi that are very surprising. When Ibn Arabi says, for example, in order to develop, unfurl our personality, God has to take into consideration our wishes. Now that's very surprising. And my father says the same thing. So he says, he says, the mind of God is formed in man. And so these are ways of looking at things which are very surprising, and as I say, not at all traditional, and so on, and that's what Sufism is about.
So in this process of, do you visualize God in a form,
no,
in
absolutely
energy?
not.
When you say God is stepping stone,
Yes.
does this relate to, you have done a lot of work and you're interested in sort of the meeting ground between,
Yes.
say, Buddhism and is God merely used as a deity, is used to transcend that to the notion of
well,
emptiness?
you see, the difference is, of course, in Islam, no idolatry, you see, and that applies to the Pir, who is the destroyer of the idol people make of him. No, the interesting thing here is that, the Buddhists have, well, the Tibetan Buddhists have developed what one calls a method of making states of consciousness corporeal. It's a notion which I don't know, I haven't found it in my studies of Buddhism in its original form. I think it's a development that we found in Buddhism, and which tallies absolutely with what the Sufis are doing. That is how one's realization is translated in terms of the confection of one's inner body, for example, and even one's physical body, as what the Sufis call that which transpires behind that which appears. So let's say even our etheric body or our astral will, let's say, aura as a template in which our body is being formed. So we're working with the aura in order to confection it, so that its form is somehow determined by one's realization, and therefore by working with qualities. For example, if you work with, for example, honesty, truthfulness, and you watch yourself in the mirror and see the difference it makes in your face, and instead of thinking, well, let's be, as Mrs. Thatcher said, economic but true. No, you see, then that immediately has an effect upon your being, your physical being. Now, the difference there between Buddhism and Sufism is that one concentrates on a deity which is a stereotyped form, which does give some sense of that quality. Now, in Sufism, there's no idolatry, so one is working with the quality instead of that form, because then one is discovering the form in oneself that corresponds to it, rather than trying to conform oneself to a given form.
But what are sort of these qualities? Buddhism says altruism, compassion. What is sort of the ideal of the bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition? What are the qualities that the Sufi aspires to?
The Rahman and Rahim are the first two qualities in the 99 names of God. Rahman. The difference is Rahman, for me, Rahman is magnanimity, and Rahim is compassion. And so Rahman means to have room in one's heart for people who are obnoxious, whereas Rahim means to commiserate with people who are suffering.
So what techniques do you use to cultivate this in yourself?
Well, I would say that basically we're dealing with the human personality. That I would say that our teaching is complementary to psychotherapy, in the sense that you see, people go to a psychotherapist because they feel that they have been abused, or, you know, they have resentment. And so the psychotherapist is trying to cure them from their resentment, so they have a sense of a kind of illness, psychological illness, and so on and so forth, and it's quite true. It's a kind of poison. Now, for the Sufis, of course, you know, if you are conscious of the greatness of God in your being, then you don't have resentment for people. You're too. I mean, you know, an elephant doesn't like the chickens, but it's below its dignity to get irritated by the chickens. So a kind of sense of the greatness of your being will help you to overcome resentment. And otherwise, you're there fighting with your ego. How can your will fight with your ego?
What about this sort of the social responsibility, you know, the interaction of the Sufi with the community, not just sort of striving sort of. Is there a sort of a social activist dimension to the Sufi philosophy?
Yes.
Is it?
Well, for one thing, there's a very great sense of what one might call brotherhood. Nowadays one could call kinship, because one secularist terms, in the communities themselves. Of course, for example, our members are so enriched by meeting other members, like they feel a sense of, we belong to this family, you see, because there's something in common between them. And eventually it extends to other people, who, without proselytizing, because we don't believe in that. But somehow people say, well, there's something there. I remember, you know, we organized a tour in India, maybe it was 10 years ago, I don't remember. And the hotel keeper said, the receptionist said, oh, there's something about you Sufis, you're all like angels. Well, I mean, it was a little bit exaggerated, but still, maybe there's something that has its effect, let's say, spills over with other people. They say, well, what is it about you? I'd like to know something about it.
Is there a form of, shall we say, engaged Sufism that looks at sort of an activist response to?
Well, let us say that, you know, that the origin of Sufism is really what they call a futuhat, which means chivalry. And in fact, the legends of Parsifal and so on, they originated in Iran, so on and so forth, the Crusades. And in fact, initiation in the Sufi Order is a pledge of service. And so we are promoting service of humanity, and well, I can give you an example, an extreme example of it, and that's the example of my sister. Now, I remember listening to the voice of Hitler when he said, my patience is exhausted, I'm declaring war. Millions of people are suffering agony because his patience was exhausted. And my sister and myself, we had to decide whether we were going to participate in the war or not. And we were very deeply impressed by the teaching of Gandhi, non-violence, and so it was a problem. What are we going to do? And I said, now supposing that there's a Nazi with a machine gun and he has 80 hostages and he's about to shoot them, and your only chance of stopping that is to shoot him, then where is nonviolence? And then my sister said, yes, it's true, but I don't feel I could kill anybody. And I said, yes, I feel the same. One day we decided that we were going to involve us in the war without killing. So what could we do? So my sister volunteered to land in France with a radio in order to maintain contact with the underground. She was I would say, the ultimate link before the invasion between the War Office and the French underground. And it was her intervention that made all the difference in the war.
And what was your role? What did you find for
I
yourself?
was minesweeping, ahead of the troops that were landing in Normandy as an officer in the British Navy. And so my sister was given away by a friend of hers for 100,000 francs, and in prison in chains in Karlsruhe for 9 months, and then beaten to death in Dachau. That is what I mean by the extreme of dedication to service for humanity, and it was based upon the teaching of the Sufis.
In Sufism, you have, as in many faiths, you have this sort of enormous sense of timelessness. When you look at sort of the beginning of the new millennium, what sense of the future do you have? Despair, hope, optimism?
Yes.
The enormity of the
thing
future?
is that, of course, the millennium, the date, whatever it was, the 1st of January 2000, doesn't correspond to any astrological thing at all, of course. But there was a great storm, of course, as you know. But you know, we when we're writing a book, you decide whether you're going to open a new chapter. So somehow in our minds we have created a new paradigm. We're not very clear about what it is, but somehow there's a sense that the future is going to be, let's say, more challenging. One can't say better, but more challenging, that we have to be prepared to get rid of old ways of looking at things. But it's clear to me that, for example, if you're reading a book and so you open a new chapter, well, you still have the memory of the chapter before. And so you don't discard it altogether, it's there. And so then you need to integrate that with the new instead of discarding the old. That is the challenge.
Pir Vilayat Khan, thank you very much. That's been a great blessing. This macro level that so needs to be worked on and improved, has that come up for you? I mean, sort of, you know, participation in Parliament, being active in politics, you know, working more actively at that larger stage, you know, to make more real, you know, your wonderful achievements at numerous micro levels.
Actually, I want my feet to be steady and strong at the grassroots. We, as Seva and myself, so are playing at macro level. But as you say, Parliament, I don't think it can bring change, or that I can bring a change being in the Parliament, because unfortunately in our country that when so as you take up election and contest elections, then you have to take up a party, and then because you belong to a particular party, then the other party, all others become your enemies. So you can't operate. And then when I was in the Parliament, at that time I didn't belong to any party. So for that matter, so I didn't carry any political clout. I know, and then without having a political clout, you can't bring a change. However, whatever I said was, was accepted 100% right and pure, because I didn't have anything.
Didn't have a hidden
of my
agenda.
own. Yes. But I would vote, you know, as I like, according to the merit of the case. So who would trust me? So my going to the active politics is, but I think whatever Seva is doing, and then whatever I have been doing is political action, because maybe in a small way, but we are changing the balance of power, so in favor of poor and poor women, in favor of informal sector. So I think now that we see after 27 years, now we see, second Labour Commission, which has been set up, and where one of the terms of reference is to have an umbrella legislation for for the workers in the unorganized sector. So which is that way it has been, though it took long, but even then now the unorganized sector, informal sector has become visible. Earlier, Shram Shakti report at that time when I was chairing, so it was only women, and now men and women both, all. So I think that is a commitment that the government has shown, maybe because of the pressure from say from organizations like ours. However, still legislation has a limitation, and then when the government will bring the legislation, how this unorganized sector will be able to get recognition, protection, enhancement, I'm not sure about that.
Do I sense sort of a note of pessimism there? Do you remain optimistic that the momentum that you have generated will continue to deliver?
No, I'm not pessimist at all. I'm quite enthusiastic. In fact, I feel that all my the last 50 years of freedom, after freedom, it has been, for me, it has been a constant fulfillment. So I'm not at all cynic. I have great faith in the people of India. So I'm not frustrated at that. What I'm most worried is about spending too much unnecessarily, and then that I'm not against modern or fashions or nice things, but it's too much of things, too many clothes, too many kinds of eating, and then not using your hand, physical labor. So that worries me a lot.
Gilaji, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a great honor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You always come and enhance our program. Thank you.
I'm not sure. I'm saying the same thing every time.
No, each time we're doing a little